And so I thought maybe now is the time to retire. And then there was a big gaping hole. Well, if I did that, what then? So I looked at what I had to work with, Substack and myself writing and a big house. And so I thought, well, what if I want to be a writer and I say what I want to do is write, what if I surrounded myself with writers?
Welcome to Anchor Change, where we help you panic responsibly in a chaotic world. I'm Katie Harbath. I've navigated impossible trade-offs in tech, politics, and my personal life for decades. I know that can be lonely. As a Midwesterner who spent 20 years in Silicon Valley and DC, it's taken me a while to figure it out. I still am. One thing that helps me is hearing the stories of other people forging their own paths. Because in a world of complexity, you don't have to navigate it alone. Welcome to Anchor Change. Welcome to Anchor Change. I'm Katie Harbath. My guest today is someone who has lived more lives than most of us dare to imagine. Kate Hill has been a puppeteer, a barge captain, a cookbook author, and now a writer and retreat host in Southwest France. I met Kate when I spent 2 weeks at Relais des Communs to finish the first draft of my book, and to say it was magical would be an understatement. Through all of Kate's pivots, one thread ties her story together. She is above all else a storyteller. In this conversation, we talk about how she's embraced creative reinvention at every stage of life, from buying a barge in Holland and navigating her way to France, to restoring a centuries-old farm and transforming it into a haven for artists and writers. Whether you're navigating a career change or just trying to listen more closely to your own intuition, Kate's story is a beautiful reminder that it's never too late to write a new chapter. Please enjoy. Kate, welcome to Anchor Change.
Thanks, Katie. It's great to be with you.
It's so nice to see you again. And I cannot wait to kind of dig into your story a little bit and what you've been doing. But I want to start with, you've lived many lives. You've been an art curator, you've been a barge captain, a cookbook author, retreat host, Substack writer now. What's the thread that ties all of those things together?
Well, I guess when I look at it, the actions seem very different, but for me, the continuing thread has always been what I started out as very, very young in university as a storyteller in the theater world, and particularly with theater for children as a puppeteer. So telling stories was part of my curriculum, and I learned about a beginning, a middle, and an end, where you have to have a hump in the middle and get all the kids excited, how to get them quiet again. And funnily enough, that carried right through everything I've ever done, including cooking classes or teaching online during COVID or telling my stories as a writer in Substack, as a memoir or as a weekly kind of essay. So storytelling really has been the one thread.
That's amazing. And then how do you find yourself doing those pivots? Is there a moment in time where you're feeling bored? Is it something that appears to you an opportunity? Is it off looking for adventure and that sort of next story to tell? How do I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, they're in a moment of needing to pivot themselves. And I think other people telling their stories of sort of how they've known there's that moment where, like, maybe what I've been doing isn't working anymore and I need to find that next thing.
Yeah. It's funny because every time it's different. Clearly, we can look at the most recent big change in, I think, most people's lives was during COVID or right after COVID. And that was like you were pushed up against the wall. And in my case, I was doing in-person cooking classes here at my house and my home in Comont. And there were no tourists. Nobody could travel. Everything had come to a stop. That pushed me in a direction that was like, am I going to continue to do this? Not just for that moment that had to stop, or was this the time that I should try something different? That was a big dramatic exterior push. But sometimes it's just that, as you mentioned, looking for adventure, where I always think of myself as opportunistic, that if somebody came to me with an idea and it sounded great, I wanted to be able to say yes. I didn't want to turn down an option that would be primarily in my younger days to travel. I love to travel. So it's like, who would go with me to Africa was one question. It was like, I would. And so I did, in fact, spend almost a year traveling in Africa. It's so sometimes it's those exterior things that are coming at you. And other times I personally let myself go as long and far down that road that I'm on as I can until I feel like there's no more road here. I need to change and find a new way. And then I will.
Did you think that you were always going to kind of live this more non-traditional creative life, or was it not until you kind of got to university and started traveling and stuff that you sort of realized that was the, I don't know if it's a path, but it's not the get a corporate job and work your way up the ladder for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that was ever a vision of mine. So I always saw an artistic approach to life, whether it was art or theater at university. I had a working mother who was very creative, not necessarily in her work. She's a businesswoman, but she was able to create her jobs and pursue things that she wanted to do. My mother was a big influence in my life, and for that reason. Sometimes I thought she was crazy. Other times it was like, we got to change schools again. But I realized that what she was doing was following her dreams to have a better life for herself and for us. But I think always, very early on, I knew I would lead a non-traditional life. And so wasn't a problem for me.
So walk us through what brought you to France. And I have one question in that, I didn't know if it is, do you sail a barge? Do you drive a barge? I don't know what the terminology is, but
Well,
tell
I
us
always
a
say
bit.
drive like a car because
Okay.
the motorboats, in fact, you weren't sailing there, but you navigate might be the more appropriate nautical term. So because you are navigating canals and rivers and inland waters and using charts and things like that. So I suppose navigate's a proper term, but I'd always say let's, moor the barge and park it over there. So thinking in more terms like truck driving than
I had
sailing.
to ask because I've been telling people about my time at Cavant. We're going to get to that. And I was trying to tell your story and I was like, is it sail? Is it drive? Is it navigate? So I was like, I'll have to ask her on the podcast. But so you drove into France on a barge. Walk us through how that story and how that happened.
Well, it was always the intent when I had decided with a partner that we were going to buy a canal barge in Europe and sail around for a couple of years. So that was a general adventure idea, and to charter the vessel to have people on board as a way to facilitate our life. And of course, France had the most attractive canals and river system of all of Europe. There are places you can't go. You can't go to Spain, for instance, because you can't cross the Pyrenees, or you can't go to Italy across the Alps. So once you're in continental Europe, and in fact, I bought the barge in Holland, so we navigated from Holland through the inland waterways, through Belgium and into France. And France was always a destination because of the tourism, the gastronomy, wine was an important part of that. The beautiful villages, the cultural history, and the connections of the canals and waterway system within France is very, very dense and beautiful, and leads you to almost every single city that you can think of is on a river or a navigable waterway. And that was what it was intended to be, was a couple of years of that kind of adventure following on the African trip and other things. And then I just never stopped. I stayed on the barge and lived on it for 25 years. I moored up at this little house, what was a ruin of a farm when I bought it, but it was right on the canal in Southwest France. And then that led me to kind of take one foot off the barge, one foot in the garden, until I was completely landlocked again.
Yeah, you all
It led my way here, though.
describe that farm because it's a 300-year-old farm, right? So it was mainly just some walls. There wasn't even a roof or anything, right?
Right, and the part of it, the farm itself, the property was vast and hundreds of acres, and extended all the way to the Garonne River, and where the farmers would have had access to transport by river and water for their fields and animals. The buildings were built between the 1720s and 1790s. So it was at the kind of at the time where there was less political upheaval in France, so more prosperity, and this was a very large farm. And the buildings that I ended up owning and where I live now were a barn, a piggery, and the pigeonnier, which is where the pigeons were kept in the roof for both food and fertilizer. And there was no roof on one part of it. So yeah, I did a major restoration from the ground up.
What was your original vision for Kamat? Was it always to kind of do this retreat place, or was it more?
No, no, no. I didn't see that far. I don't look that far down the road.
Okay.
I try to look just far enough. I see a little curve and then I go, okay, I'll head down that way. No, I actually was looking for a place just to live on the boat that was quieter than the moorings that I had available in town. Like my nearest town, my hometown is Agen, is about 45,000 people now. And the moorings for the boats on the canal that goes through it is right behind the train station. So as the train tracks are used all day and all night, it was and cars going by on a little road. It was quite noisy. So I used to come out to this part of the canal. It's about down 4 locks over the river, down 4 locks, and then into this sort of quiet farming area. And I used to just pull over to do all my sanding and varnishing and painting. Then I'd go back into town to get water, to have electricity. So I wasn't really looking for a place, but somebody told me that this part of Come was available for sale. And I wasn't looking for a house, but when I saw it, I realized it could be my home port, and I could live on the barge in this sort of quiet splendor of the countryside, but be just 15 minutes from town by car.
And when did cooking come into the picture? Have you always been a cook, or did that come later in life?
I think cooking was always a life skill I acquired quite young. I loved to cook when I was a kid. I had one of those Betty Crocker cookbooks where you made clown salads and you made
Yep.
pink lemonade cakes and, things like that. It was balanced that my mother and my father had owned a couple restaurants. I grew up, they were great entertainers when we were children. My mother's family was Italian, and she comes from a long line of wonderful Italian women cooks who cook not just for their families, but somehow professionally. So I was always around food. Of my siblings, I'm the only one who cooked. So I loved it personally, but I was in fertile ground. And then I just followed that through so that by the time I was in my early 20s in university, we could feed ourselves. I could feed myself and my friends. I was newly married in my early 20s, and I could share that skill that even then not many people had at my age. So I was sort of set apart by that way. And then the first thing I did in my early 20s was I inherited a small bakery up on one of the San Juan Islands where we were living. And I started this bakery on Lopez Island. And that was my first sort of professional gig. And then from there, it spun on to many, many other iterations of that. But I knew that I could always make a living, make some money by cooking if I had to. So that stayed with me.
When did you put out your first cookbook?
I published the first cookbook, Speed Press published the cookbook in 1995. And it was after I had been running the barge for 5-6 years. And I had discovered this area I was running the barge in this area of southwest France in Gascony. And I had access to this most wonderful food, and why it's been hard for me to leave from here, because I'm in the middle of this completely diverse agricultural area where I just ate the first of the white peaches that have just come out, and so sweet and juicy. I made sure I wasn't dripping it down my cheeks. But it's such a wonderful area. And as I learned about the food that was being grown here, I was learning about the culinary culture and history from my neighbors and the people who made the food, grew the food, and coached me and mentored me. And so I wanted to quickly put all this together. I hadn't thought about writing. I didn't really have any connection to writing anything, but I sat down and I put a small proposal together, and then I was accepted and sat down to write the book called The Culinary Journey in Gascony, and it was about my early days on the barge, and they were focused from the recipes I learned of that time. And then it became the entree into a whole new world that would develop quite a few years later. So we're 30 years on, and now I say I'm a writer,
Yeah,
or I
I
write.
want Yeah. Well, and it's all we've both been going on a bit of a journey of whether to call ourselves writers or not in all of that. And I want to first though, because I want to really get into that, but I also we have to talk about the farmers markets that you have. Miss it every single week when I see your pictures from those. For those of you who don't know, because I kind of forgot to, I shared a bit at the very beginning in the intro before I started talking to Kate, but we got to know each other because I went to Vermont for a writer's retreat, and you take your guests and everything to these beautiful farmers markets. But you don't just go to the farmer's market and pick out some ingredients and go home. You have a ritual, I think I would call it, about going to the markets that I would love for you to explain, because I love the intentionality, but also the serendipity that you bring to a
Yeah,
visit like
that's a
that.
great way to describe it, because I just wrote an essay for my Substack, the Vermont Journals, about being a market snob, because I realized I had just taken that week to new people who hadn't been to the market with me, a resident and a new helper here. And I realized when we started to walk through that Trisha, who's the resident, had peeled off and was buying cherries. It's the new cherry season. And I was like, oh, not yet. And I realized oh, that was a terribly snobby thing to say. They're delicious cherries, but I wanted to go down the market and see who had the best cherries. And so for me, the ritual, partly it's very social. It's saying hello and talking to the people I know who know me by name. I know them by name. I've grown to trust and appreciate their products, whether they're organic or not organic. They're for me, the best of the best. And so I want to shop from them, but I also want to see what's new. That's the serendipity. What's just come in, who has what. This is a wonderful time of year in early June where we've got all the first of the stone fruit just coming in. So we've really just had cherries coming in the market the last 2 weeks, maybe from the end of May till now. It's going to rain later in the week. We may lose all those cherries now. So we're trying to get as many as we can. Apricots, the first of the peaches, the white peaches or white nectarines. And I just love that. What am I going to see? Or is it the asparagus season, which is just about over? What's going to replace asparagus? Oh, fresh green beans, haricots verts coming in. So I build my menus and my cooking. I'm doing less entertaining, and I'm certainly not cooking. I don't cook for the Relais de Command for the residents, but I am always aware that I would like to share that with people. And I often mentor somebody. I have a young student with me now who is for a few weeks. And so I want her to have some of that experience and go away with a couple recipes that she can say, I learned this when I was in France with Kate. So there's part of me is always doing that. But the market fills so many social connections, not just for me, but for people there, that it's a very important part that even when the weather's bad, it's cold, it's rainy in the winter, you go to the market. And our markets are year round. So if you're going to buy turnips and rutabagas or carrots I suppose I could do those at the supermarket, but I go to the weekly farmers markets because I want to keep my farmers alive and keep it sustainable for all of us.
Well, we were there in February and there was a ton of stuff at
Oh, yeah.
the market. We've had to get very little at the supermarket.
Right, exactly.
So when did Come On as the creative retreat come about?
So that was a post-COVID stroke of genius. I had, as I mentioned, the in-person classes that had been scheduled for 2020 had been canceled, put on hold. Now we're drifting into 21. I had quickly up my technical game online and joined Zoom like everybody and was teaching online courses online and did 70 odd videos from the comforts of my little kitchen here with my telephone, and later with some lights and a few things, but just starting up pretty rudimentary. And now we're going into the second year of that, and I'm thinking, like, where is this going? And there was so little return on I do what I do because it's a people to people energy exchange, and sitting around a table at the end of the day with people you cooked with and having conversations about everything that you can think of. And that had all disappeared by going online, even though there's a lot of good things about it I learned and I enjoyed, but there wasn't enough reward for me as a person to want to get up and keep doing that. And then I sat back and I also thought, maybe this is the time that I stop teaching. I'm now 70. I was then just 70. I'm 73 now. And I thought, where do you go? Where, I can physically, mentally continue to teach. My knees are shot. I'm tired. I'm standing on, I can't stand on my legs like I did, for 40, 50 years. And so I thought maybe now is the time to retire. And then there was a big gaping hole. Well, if I did that, what then? I had just started Substack. I'd been always writing on a newsletter through my website, but I moved it to Substack in the spring, in April of 21. So I was just seeing, and I hadn't quite formatted yet where that would go. I didn't know what that was going to be about, but I thought if there was a time to make a change, really do what would be the one thing I wanted to do now would be that time. So I looked at what I had to work with, Substack and myself writing, and a big house, which I had now converted from a ruin to a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, big rambling French farmhouse with 2 kitchens and 2 living rooms and enough space to really, have people to visit always, a big garden. And so I thought, well, what if I want to be a writer and I say what I want to do is write, what if I surrounded myself with writers? If you want to go to, as one of my early students said to me, if you want to learn to surf, you go to Hawaii. If you want to learn to make charcuterie, you come to France and to me. And if you want to be a writer, then surround yourself with writers and books, of course, which I have way too many of. So I looked at what that could look like to open the doors to come on instead of as tourists, which I've done in the past, Airbnb or vacation home rentals, but specifically for writers and other creatives, artists, illustrators, photographers as well. But I find that about 3/4 of my residents are writers. And if I surround myself with writers, I will then write too. That doesn't necessarily be true, but it was the way I could trick myself and say that I would then say, I will keep writer's hours or whatever it is that, however I decided I wanted to do it. And that was the impetus. And right away, things took off because I've actually been doing this the whole time I've lived here because so many of my friends and colleagues are writers and artists and photographers and illustrators. So as they've come and gone as friends or invited guests, they were only just here for a few days. Now I was imposing that they should come for a minimum of 2 weeks because it takes time to allow yourself to open up and be quiet and take the time to get into what your project or where your head needs to go. And so when I established the Relais de Comment, and I said the tagline was a quiet place to work, the idea was that was what I was inviting people to come. Don't come and be here on vacation. I'm not going to cook for you. Come here and work like I am working. And that served me well. And I feel like not only have I opened up my personal home, but I've been able to create a space that continues to kind of energize people in a very quiet way and allow them to do their work.
Yeah, you curate things very well because it's the people, the energy, the what's in the garden, it's it's both intentional, but it's also wild. You wrote a piece recently about, what was it, gardening like a painter and then writing like a gardener. I might have those all kind of mixed up. That really inspired me. And how do you how do you think about that? How do you approach that? Because I don't think that that just happens.
I'm sorry, that the
No, no, it's
energy
okay. The question I was trying to ask is like, I think you don't, like you said, you don't just allow anybody to come on. You don't want people to come just for
I
vacation.
bet people,
You
yes.
vet people, and so I think that that's really important in terms of the energy and the people and stuff that you bring in, but then also how you do your gardens and the environment that you
No,
create. And
I follow what I want to do. Ultimately, I'm super
yeah.
selfish. I say, oh, well, if I do this for the residents, then if I make sure there's fresh herbs planted all through the garden, so they have to go out and find them to use them to cook or to whatever, they're going to discover other things. But I'm also doing it for myself because I want to have those things scattered throughout the garden for myself. I do feel very much there's an energy here that it is intentional. And I had some long conversations recently with a couple guests who were staying for a few days. And the word magic kept coming up, like how magical it was, or it felt magical here. And it's like, I have to stop myself from saying, yeah, but magic doesn't really exist. You make magic happen. I mean, the guy who pulls a bunny out of the hat, that's not real. He's made that happen, that magician. But we don't want to see that. We don't want to know how it happens. We want to just be delighted in the magic of it, which I love because I go through my day saying, well, that has to get weeded. That needs to be repainted and got to fix that toilet. But then when somebody comes and all they see is this beautiful magic veneer, it's like I take credit for it, but I also say a lot of it comes from this place because I'm inspired all the time to do something here. There's something about this house. There's something about it sits next to the canal, but it sits over running water, underground water that's running into the alluvial field of the Garonne River. There's an energy, if I want to go into that kind of level of things, there's something here that is way beyond anything I can make happen. And an example is that two of the people that are here now, a resident and a worker, have never met. They're two generations apart, have no contact. Nothing was presupposed. And their fields of study, one at 20 years old and one at 50 years old, are the same field of study in early English literature. So it was like they're all of a sudden now there's a mentor and a mentee that had never met that I couldn't have planned. I couldn't have said, to Georgia, would you, what is it? What are you studying? And blah, blah, blah. What are you looking for? I just basically said, would you pull weeds and wash dishes? And so what's happened is this wonderful relationship between her and English literature professor from Australia, who's does the exact same, teaches in the field that she's studying in. So there's something magical and wonderful and serendipitous about being here that happens that I could like to take credit for it, but I can't. Sometimes it's just,
It's so special. I miss it every single week. I'm like, can I
um,
show up on your front door? I mean, I'll ask you first, but
people
it's
do
like,
all the time. I said to somebody recently who was here for 3 weeks, you'll be back. Don't say goodbye. You'll be back. So I was like, I don't say goodbye. It's au revoir. See you soon.
so I want to talk about your journey as a writer too, because you mentioned about you've been writing for a while. You'd written the cookbook and then wrote the newsletter. What has that journey been like for you as you continue to grow that and fit that into the things that you're doing?
I think that, that first book I wrote, and I've now published 3 books, that the first book was a trial. I didn't know whether I could write a recipe. So I was writing a cookbook with head
Mhm.
notes, a little bit of story, and then a little more. And then that storytelling side of me took over. But then when I sat down to do and then I was well received and published and eventually went out of print as things do, but I have republished it myself as an ebook. And so to keep the information in print. But I realized that gave me the confidence I could do another book, another cookbook. I was still within the realm of cookbooks, but there's always been the story to tell. So I wrote a book, basically a monograph about France's most beloved dish, cassoulet, a French obsession. I called it a cassoulet French obsession. And I self-published it. Then it was later republished by Rancho Gordo imprint in California. Of course, Steve Sanders' wonderful beans starred in many a cassoulet in the United States. And so I saw that now as I put a book together by myself. And I thought, so writing, it was never just writing for writing's sake, but it was writing to produce something, which maybe has a little different connotation. I never been somebody who got up in the morning and wrote morning words about. I did always keep a journal when I traveled. That was an important part of my traveling days, was a sketching and writing journal. But after I published those two books, and I felt confident of my place as a voice in that world, the cookbook world. And by now I'd been here 20 odd years, that I could write about living here. And so not just a recipe, but stories of the people here, of the people who taught me to cook, or the people who grow the food, the life and the natural world that's here, which is more organized as agriculture than it is wilderness. But there's an amazing, wonderful, wild rhythm to it all that once you pay attention. And ultimately, I realized writing was the outcome of this observation level that I like to work at. I love to be able to see what's going on in the world, whether it's right at my feet in my own garden or it's further afield. And so writing became the raison d'etre that I could then do these other things, to observe, whether it was travel or indulge myself in learning about butchering charcuterie for a dozen years, because why not? If I could do that, I could write about it then. So that, as I continued to develop that, so by the time I was writing my newsletter through my website, as I mentioned, but when I stepped onto Substack as a platform, and this is going to sound like an evangelical moment, but aside from all the other positive things about it, what I realized is there were all these other writers doing this too. Now I was part of a community. When I'm writing on my own newsletter on my website, nobody else, the people who are receiving it see it, but nobody else does. And so now I was in a community that was sharing all their writing in every genre you can imagine: science fiction, horror, politics, health, farming, landscape, cooking, obviously, a ton of food writers. So I realized, like, this was a very, very fertile ground. So it would be like driving along a landscape, seeing stone, desert, rocks, and then you start to see green fields and cows grazing and barns full of hay. And you think, oh, let's build our farm here. And that's how I felt about Substack. Let's write here, because this is where other people are writing. And at that same time, I was doing the transition from cooking school to creative residence. And so the two of them are very interlinked for me.
Well, that's how I found you, was on Substack, and how I found out about the residency was that community that was, and it was really Substack notes that I think really took it off too, because then I was seeing posts by you and other people in my feed quite a bit. And you also serialized your memoir on Substack. How did you make that decision, A, to write a memoir, but then B, to not do it in the traditional way, but to do it on Substack?
Well, I was just at that point of feeling comfortable that what I was doing, like writing on. The other thing about Substack that helped me is that it got me to write every week. I felt there was a rhythm that made sense for a lot of people. It was weekly. Some people it's twice a month, or some people it's daily. I don't know how they do that. But I liked that weekly rhythm because it made me think early in the week, what am I going to write about? I would start making notes. I would sit down, I would do a rough draft. The next day I'd polish it up. The next day I'd I'd publish it. And so as I was moving forward with that and getting quite comfortable with that, I thought, well, what now? What should I do with this? And I came across by accident, as as I'm looking through notes or looking through other people's, Sarah Faye's Writers at Work Substack, who Sarah Faye is a teacher and a coach and a mentor, and she writes and teaches writers about writing. And she had serialized 2 books now of hers on Substack, and she had done a online workshop that was available just through subscribing through her on how to serialize a novel or how to serialize a memoir. And so I thought, oh, serialize a memoir. Oh, that's what I'll do. And it was really that kind of simple. I quickly did the workshop. There was 6 parts to it. It was all self-driven, and you just sort of fill things in. And then I contacted her and said I was interested in doing some one-on-one coaching with her because I felt that was a good match for me. I liked her very pragmatic, do this, that style without interfering in your voice or your internal speaking. It was more like how to use Substack to make this work. I started in that fall to write and produce what I titled Finding France, a memoir in small bites. And it was very specifically about my discovering France, and all the questions that you've asked are sort of in that memoir, which lasted over the course of a year, and I wrote weekly, including recipes. So in a book form, there'd be recipes every chapter, and that's how I did it. So it's still archived. It's on my Substack, and people who subscribe that pay and have access to that archive can then read through, and it may develop into something else. There may be a published book that gets developed from there, and I'm certainly looking at another new project. But Substack lends itself to that kind of serialization for lots of reasons.
And how do you decide that you mentioned for paid subscribers? I'm just kind of curious how you're thinking about the paywall, what you put out there for free versus what you ask people to pay for.
Yeah, there's always a lot of back and forth, and I think I've wobbled back and forth several times myself, but always knowing that there should be a paid level, because people need to know that, in order to do this takes X amount of time to do this. You need to, if it's part of what you're doing, it's not just a hobby, then, you need to earn money from it to take time from other things that will pay the bills, the dog food or the cat's vet bills or whatever. And so right away, I had a paid subscriber level. As is, pretty common, especially with the food writing world, the things behind the paywall were recipes, or some recipes, the archive to the whole. I've been writing now for 4 years. So there's almost 300 posts with a lot of recipes threaded in there. So people can go back, they can use the search button and search for cherry recipes or cherries and see what I've written about in other times of the year. So I've always had that there should be paid. And then I know that there's a wonderful group of people who support what I do and encourage what I do. And I want to reward them by being faithful readers. So I try to offer them special things from time to time. But I've come away back from that in thinking that in building a subscription base from what initially I brought to Substack, about 1,700 people from my own mailing list, I now have 11,000. And that 11,000 people that I don't know personally, or haven't known for very long, I want them to see what I'm writing. If I put everything behind a paywall, nobody's going to see it, just those that pay, and
Yeah.
believe not 11,000 people that pay. So as much as I want to build that, I want people to read my words. So it's always that balance. What do you do? Go back and forth. And I'm looking at, restructuring some of that in the near future. Generally, my undying gratitude goes to people who pay. And when I write, I think about those people. And I hope that the people who are just reading casually at some point get hooked enough that they say, I want to stay hooked, and I'm committed to doing that.
You've been posting a lot on social media too, on Instagram and Substack notes. What's your sort of strategy on that? And have you been finding it helpful in getting new people to discover your work?
Yeah, I don't think there is a strategy. I mean, we just had a conversation over aperitifs the other night about this. And it was very interesting because I did start on Instagram. I was on Facebook, like a lot of people started on Instagram pretty early. It's a pretty, for an old girl, I'm in my 70s. So I'm going to say I'm not a social media influencer, but at 20,000 followers on Instagram, it's a substantial group, again, of people who are following and looking for a little French hit every day, or looking for a little, food porn that's going to make them want to go in their kitchen and, make some toast, or, whatever. Sometimes if you're going to come out of it and say, I really want to create that roast chicken with duck fat potatoes, there's that level. But sometimes it's just as much a visual reminder that you should eat or drink something or go sit outside in your garden or take a walk in the park. And so I look at that, and I've tried various things to strategize can I roll those people over and make them loyal readers? Years ago, my sister told me she worked in a general store in Alaska. I love this story. She said, we'd look at guys that came in the shop and we'd say, are they readers or lookers? And they were looking at the magazine stand. It was like, were they reading the Atlantic Monthly, the New Yorker, or were they looking at the girly magazines? And that was basically the two things. And so I think with Instagram, they're lookers, and with Substack, they're readers, and there's not a lot of overlap. Sometimes, and there's a little bit of, you have to click too many buttons. You have to do something different. So I just sort of look at it. I like to use Instagram. I like to take photographs on my phone. I have in the past tried to plan things and use those services. It doesn't feel right for me. I'd rather say, gee, I haven't been out in the garden this morning. Let's take a walk around and then I'll see what's there. And then that will inspire something. And as often as not, that inspires me then to write something. An image often will inspire me to write something.
What advice would you give to somebody who's in midlife or later who might feel stuck and is scared to take a leap?
Dad, what are you waiting for? It's like short, and it's like, yeah, it's scary sometimes, but I think that what's the worst thing that can happen is, like, you probably don't know what the worst thing that can happen. And so you'll never know, and you won't have to worry about that. I think if we worry so much about what's going to happen if you do something, what about if you don't do it? I think that it's important. And I have to say, at this stage in life, as I don't want to pull the age card all the time, but after living a long time, you realize sometimes you just got to get off your butt and do something. And if it doesn't work out, don't worry. 9 times out of 10, you're going to take something from that. But I don't think I've ever regretted anything I've done. It's the things, and it's a cliche, it's the things you don't do that you regret. Did you not stop and go inside that museum when you were in Paris a million times? How long did it take me to walk into the Louvre? I don't know what was stopping me. Decades. I only visited the Louvre probably 10 years ago. And it was just like, and I love art. And I was just like, I just sort of put it aside. Had I not done that, I thought, had I not stood in front of the Mona Lisa, had I not seen the Winged Victory in person instead of a cliche icon, those are the things that, that's not going to worry me going to my deathbed. But why wouldn't I do that? So yeah, stop and go in and do the things and take the moment to have the coffee and watch the world go by and do the things that take the risk, because the risks are where the fun is. That's how I think anyway. But I'm such.
It's a great way to end this, Kate. Thank you so much for joining me. I just really, really appreciate it.
Oh, Katie, it's been delightful. And I'll look forward to seeing you again here.
For sure. I will be there again. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Kate. I wanted to have her on to talk about all of those life experiences that she shared with us. 3 things that are really sticking out to me. One is you don't have to know the whole path, just the next curve. Kate reminded us that pivots don't require a 5-year plan. They sometimes it's about the next step and saying yes to what's calling you now. Creativity doesn't retire. Whether she was restoring a farmhouse, writing a cookbook, or hosting a residency, Kate shows that reinvention is possible at any stage of life and that curiosity ages really well. And finally, magic is intentional. What feels serendipitous often springs from thoughtful curation and brave decisions. Kate's life is a masterclass in creating environments where creativity and connection can flourish. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also don't forget, I've got my quiz going on panicrisponsibly.com about what kind of panic persona are you? Are you a chaos theorist? Are you a shadow sage? Are you a soft alarmist? Are you a glitch optimist or a grounded witch? Head over to panicrisponsibly.com to take the quiz. It's helping me to figure out which new merch designs I want to launch here during the summer and into the fall. Until next time.